They kept my dog and blocked my calls. I stood on their porch with a folder of papers, a calm voice, and a plan. I had the microchip number, the adoption paper, and every vet bill. The dog's name is Buddy here. He came home with me a small, clumsy shelter puppy, the color of autumn leaves. I signed for him on a rainy Saturday that felt like a promise, spent the next afternoon at a low-cost clinic to get him chipped, and called the microchip company that evening with the number and my phone. For anyone listening who hasn't done it, a microchip is a tiny ID under the skin. A microchip links a pet to the registered owner record. I kept the adoption agreement and the chip sticker in a plastic sleeve in my filing box, the way some people keep birth certificates and passports. When my relationship fell apart, the household did too. We signed separate leases in the same complex while we untangled furniture and bills. Buddy stayed with me, but during the move there were 2 nights when the neighbor across the courtyard, let's call him Greg, offered to watch Buddy so he wouldn't be underfoot. Greg loves dogs. He's the type to keep extra treats by his door for passing paws. Those 2 nights turned into a week because my new landlord wanted the carpet replaced before I brought in a dog bed. When I texted Greg that the carpet was done and I'd be over right after work, the tone changed. He replied with a thumbs up, then nothing. Then, late that evening, he's sleeping, tomorrow. I didn't love it, but I didn't want to yank the dog out at midnight, so I said, morning is fine. 9 a.m. The morning came, and the message did not. My calls slid to voicemail. I walked over, no answer. I sent, please return, Buddy. A read receipt appeared and then silence. They kept my dog and blocked my calls. I started with the calmest version of myself. I slid a note under Greg's door. Hey, it's me. I'm picking up Buddy today by 6. I have his food and meds here. If you're tied up, leave the leash with the front office. I told myself there would be a reasonable explanation, but I also pulled the plastic sleeve from my filing box and added things to it. The shelter adoption paper with my name, the vet records with my address, the microchip sticker, and the confirmation email printed out, and, because my new lease required it, the pet addendum that listed Buddy under my unit. Every official document listed me as the owner. By noon, the new landlord left me a voicemail. Just a reminder, pet addendum needs the microchip number and vaccination proof by the end of the week, or there's a non-compliance fee. It wasn't a crisis yet, but there was a clock running now. I called back and said, I have the number, I have the vaccinations, I'm dealing with a neighbor situation. I'll bring the packet in person. He wasn't interested in the drama, just the paper. Fair enough. I scanned everything and emailed a copy to myself. I put the originals in the folder and tucked the folder under my arm like I was heading to a bank. When I knocked again, Greg answered through the door, not at it. Buddy's fine, he said. He's been calmer with me. He bonded more. He sounded like someone who had rehearsed the sentence. I said, that's not how this works. He's my dog. He said, he chooses me. I took a breath. Feelings are real, but records are what count in moments like this. Bonded isn't ownership. Records are. I asked him to step outside and talk like neighbors. He didn't. He said, you shouldn't even have a dog in there. Your last place had hardwood. You've got carpet. He likes my place. We take long runs. He's happy. Here is the plain English reality, which I said through the door. Pets are family to us, but on paper they're property. Paperwork and microchip data are how officials identify who should have the animal. I also said, I'm not going to argue with the door. I told him I would be back in an hour with someone neutral so we could all stay calm. He didn't answer. On the way to the office, I stopped at the property manager's desk. I need 2 things, I said. First, to add the microchip number to the pet addendum. Second, a note from you confirming that Buddy is on my lease. The manager looked over the paperwork, typed and printed a one-liner on letterhead. Tenant is approved for 1 dog, Buddy, per pet addendum on file. She also underlined the line where any pet had to be registered to the unit actually keeping the animal. The property office put his name on my lease addendum. I slipped the letter into my folder. I called the non-emergency police line next, not to make it a criminal scene, but because I wanted a civil standby. If you haven't done one, it's simple. Officers don't decide who owns what. They just stand there to keep a tense exchange from turning into a loud one. The officer said it was a civil matter, but he'd keep the peace. He offered a time an hour later. I texted Greg, police will be present to keep things calm. I'm returning at 3 to pick up Buddy. The read receipt popped again. No response. Back at Greg's, 2 officers stood with me. They were polite and careful. One said to my door, "We're just here to make sure nobody gets heated. Nobody's getting arrested. Can you come talk to us?" This time Greg opened. He stood with a leash draped over his palm, but no dog attached to it. The hallway smelled faintly of wet fur and oatmeal shampoo. He said, "He's sleeping. He likes my voice. He's calmer with me." I held the folder like a passport at a border. "This is Buddy's adoption," I said, and I showed the paper with the shelter's letterhead and my signature. "This is his microchip number, registered to me, and an email confirmation. These are vet records with me as the owner. This is a letter from the property manager noting Buddy is on my pet addendum." I wasn't handing him my originals. I let him look. He darted through the pages with a look that tried to be dismissive and landed on unsettled. One officer said, "Would you be willing to come with us to a vet clinic so they can scan the chip?" "Then there's no argument," Greg said. He chose me, again, like a song stuck in his teeth. The officer kept it plain. "We can't make a judgment on property, but we can suggest the quickest way to check a record everyone can see. If the chip has his info, then it's easy." Greg's jaw hovered. He finally said, "Fine, but I'm walking him." "That's great," I said. "Walk him into the clinic with us. We'll scan, we'll confirm, and we'll all come back." We caravanned, me in my car, officers behind, Greg walking Buddy on the sidewalk. Buddy saw my car and pulled toward it, that full-body dog bend that says, "There you are." I rolled the window down and said his name. He leaned toward the sound and whimpered. Greg shortened the leash. He didn't look at me. At the clinic, the tech at the desk didn't seem surprised. This wasn't their first microchip question. She pulled a handheld scanner from a drawer like a grocery checkout wand. I sat on the bench, hands steady, voice low. Greg stood with his shoulders hooked up toward his ears. Buddy looked at me, then at him, confused by the arrangement. The tech knelt and asked, "Is he friendly?" "Yes," I said. "He knows me." She swept the wand between Buddy's shoulders and down his side until it gave a soft beep. She read the number out loud and typed it in. The screen popped with a name and a phone that I knew like the back of my own hand. The scanner beeped and showed my name and phone. She printed the page. It listed my name, my old address where the chip was first registered, and the date of registration. "Do you want us to update the address?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and you can add a second contact." I added my sister's number. Greg stared at the paper like it was a trick of angles. "He said I could keep him," he muttered, looking at the counter. I didn't. I had never said that sentence in any order. He switched to a new script. "He's better with me. He's calmer." The officer, who had watched this unfold with the patience of a librarian, said, "That may be true, but we're not doing best home decisions here. We're just trying to avoid a fight." Buddy rested his head on my knee like a period at the end of that sentence. I added 2 more pages to this small mountain. One was the adoption agreement from the shelter. The second was a clause in that agreement that said dogs couldn't be given away or sold. If the adopter couldn't keep the dog had to go back to the shelter. The adoption contract said no transfer without the shelter's consent. "I signed this when I took him home," I said. "He was never yours to be gifted or kept." The tech slid the vet records across the counter at my request. "We've seen him 3 times," she said. "Vaccines, the ear infection, and a spring checkup." Every page said, "Owner, my name." I had paid those invoices with a bruised debit card and a smile because he was mine and you pay for your own. The vet record listed me as owner responsible party. I set those pages on top. Greg's argument moved to the last island. Sentiment. "He follows me," he said. "He listens when I call him." I nodded. "He's a friendly dog. He listens to most people if they're kind. He listens to the mail carrier, too. That doesn't transfer ownership." The officer nodded once. The tech looked like someone watching a tug-of-war where one side had already crossed the line and didn't know it yet. We stepped back into the afternoon. The officers didn't raise voices or wave hands. They waited while the facts did their quiet work. If someone wants the laws here in one sentence, this is the cleanest version I can offer from that day. The name on the adoption paper, the microchip registration, and the vet records are what officials recognize when there's a question paper and chip beat opinion. Greg held the leash like it was a string attached to a kite that had stopped respecting the wind. He tried one last time. "Let me keep him tonight and say goodbye," he said. "He'll be upset otherwise." Buddy's tail wagged like a small engine. I looked at the leash. I looked at Buddy. I thought about the nights he had slept without me. wondering why his bed and his human smelled different. I shook my head. "No," I said, "we'll all be fine." I pulled a second leash from my pocket and held it out. "You can keep that one." "I have mine," the officer said. "It's time." Greg stared for a long 3 seconds and then did the simplest, cleanest thing he could have done earlier. He finally unclipped his leash and handed it to me. I clipped on my leash and walked my dog out the front door. Buddy didn't look back. He hopped into my car like we had only paused at a gas station. In the mirror, Greg stood on the sidewalk, hands dead at his sides, and watched us drive away. My hands shook on the steering wheel for the first 4 blocks. Then I laughed. A small, ridiculous sound that felt like air returning to a room. Quick recap. I gathered the adoption paper, microchip info, vet records, and lease addendum. With the civil standby and a clinic scan, the facts did the talking. At stake was my dog and a landlord penalty that would start charging by week. At home, I set Buddy's bed down in the corner where the sunlight pools at 4 in the afternoon. He circled the familiar blanket twice, flopped, and let out a long exhale that sounded like forgiveness. I texted the property manager a photo of the microchip page and the updated vaccination record. She replied with a thumbs up and received. I took the originals to the office, had them make copies, and got a stamped pet addendum updated note for my file. I registered him that afternoon and the fees vanished. The manager also sent an email to the building reminding everyone that pets have to be listed under the right unit, not with a friend, because the building needed to know where an animal actually lived in case of fire alarms or emergencies. The next day, I sent Greg a single measured message. "Buddy is home. Please don't come by unannounced. If you need to contact me about any items of yours I have, reply with an itemized list and I'll leave them with the front office." He wrote back that I had overreacted. He said I should be grateful for his help. He said again that Buddy liked him better. I didn't argue with all that air. I replied with a small sentence and a photo of the microchip page. This is what settled it. A week later, I took Buddy back to the clinic for a wellness check because not everything should be a document or a duel. The vet pressed her fingers lightly over his ribs and said his weight was perfect. His ear infection history was quiet, his eyes clear. We added a secondary contact to the microchip. My sister and the clinic printed a fresh card with "Owner," my name, on the top. The tech reminded me to update the microchip if I changed phone numbers. "It only helps if it can reach you," she said. I nodded and filed the card in the plastic sleeve. About 10 days after the clinic day, I got an email from property management addressed to all residents with pets. It was a gentle reminder to keep pets listed under the correct lease and to avoid extended care by non-residents without permission. It didn't name Greg. It didn't need to. He sent me a short, sour message hours later. They fined me for having an unregistered pet overnight. He called me names that live in the shallow end of the pool. The fine wasn't my choice or my joy. It was the building enforcing a rule it had written. I didn't reply. Just consequences arrive in their own envelopes. I didn't have to stamp them. My ex, who was part of why the neighbor had Buddy in the first place, reached out too. She asked if I'd handled it without making a scene. I told her exactly what we did. Papers, chip, calm, clinic. She said, good. Then she asked if she could take Buddy to the park that weekend, supervised, because she missed him. That was its own knot to untie. I told her yes, for an hour, in daylight, with me there, because not every door needs to be slammed to be closed. We met at the park. Buddy ran between us the way kids do when their parents share a bench. She threw the ball. I packed water. When the hour ended, we walked him back to my car together. She said thank you. We both meant it and also meant more. Where we are now, Buddy is home. The building has his info. The neighbor is not a character in our routine. The stakes have cooled into a simple commitment. Don't get sloppy with important paperwork. The part of the story that is mine to keep is what I learned about proof. The microchip wasn't a piece of metal in a mystery place. It was an anchor. The adoption paper wasn't a sentimental souvenir. It was a transfer of ownership written in clear ink. The vet records weren't just receipts. They were a timeline with my name stamped across it. The lease addendum wasn't an annoyance. It was a map to where the dog actually lived. I didn't raise my voice at Greg because none of those things needed volume to work. Paper, chip, and calm beat a dozen loud speeches. There were moments, after the adrenaline cooled, when I wondered if I had misread Greg entirely. Maybe he wanted company, and a dog filled a silence in his apartment. Maybe he believed in the phrase, "he chose me," so hard that it felt like a real argument. I thought about leaving the story parked there in empathy's lot, but empathy doesn't return dogs. And I had to remember the silence of my phone and the lock of the door and the leash draped like an answer he wasn't quite giving. He had a dozen chances to be neighborly and chose a wall over a handshake. I set routines that made backslides unlikely. I walked Buddy at the opposite end of the complex in the early mornings. I gave the property office a copy of a brief note. If anyone inquires about Buddy's residence or status, please refer them to me only. I put his crate by the bedroom door where he could see me when I worked late at the desk. We took a training class together not because he needed it, but because I did. The trainer's first lesson was for humans. Reward what you want more of. I wanted to reward calm, so I did, mostly in myself. About a month later, I saw Greg at the mailbox. He didn't meet my eyes. He said nothing. I said, "Afternoon," because sometimes an adult thing is small. He stared at the flyers and left without a word. That was the end of it in practice. But 3 months after the clinic scan, he left a note under my door. It was 2 lines written in tidy block letters that surprised me. "I'm sorry for how I handled the dog. It won't happen again." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a reform. It was the only sentence he owed me and the only one I was going to get. I didn't reply. I kept the note in the same sleeve as the chip number. Some people want a courtroom ending with gavels and declarations. I didn't. I wanted a living room ending with the sound of a dog sighing at my feet while the kettle hissed. I got that. I also got a new habit of checking the chip number once a year when we do vaccines, the way you test a smoke alarm. It takes 30 seconds and closes a door in your mind that you didn't realize was still ajar. Quick recap. The neighbor stalled. I stayed calm. We scanned the chip, the papers lined up, and we walked out. The building enforced its rules without me raising a hand. What mattered were documents, not opinions. There were a few conversations I had to have with myself in the weeks after. One was about anger. Anger, in my experience, loves to dress up as energy and then do no work. I could have spun in circles, telling the story to anyone who would listen with the volume on 9, but I tried to use that power for something boring and helpful. I organized my life in a way that would make the next crisis not just a pet one quieter. I made a vital papers folder that lived in a fireproof box with a physical checklist taped to the inside of the lid. Adoption paper, microchip, vet records, lease addendum, emergency contact card. I saved PDFs of everything to a cloud drive with a name I'd remember if I were flustered. Another conversation was about kindness and boundaries. I enjoy neighbors who borrow sugar and return a slice of cake. I don't mind doing favors. But I understood now that favors need dates and sentences attached. I can watch Buddy until Friday at 6 p.m. After that, I need him back. If someone resists that sentence, they're not asking for a favor anymore. They're attempting a transfer. A clear return time is a leash for a favor. I updated Buddy's tag too. The brass disc had his name and my number. I added microchipped in tiny letters. It felt like wearing a seatbelt most days. You forget it's there, and the day you need it, it's the only thing that matters. On the back, I had a phrase engraved that the trainer suggested, "If I'm out alone, I'm lost." It sounds like a joke, but people read it and act differently. The day someone finds your dog is not always the day they do the right thing. You can help them along with a nudge. If you're listening to this and thinking, "I don't have a stack of papers like that," you can make one now. Call the microchip company and make sure they have your number. Ask your vet for a printout of the last visit that says owner, your name. Put your adoption or purchase document in a clear sleeve with those too. If your housing has a pet addendum, keep a copy. It is not about being litigious. It's about being ready to tell the truth calmly when someone invites confusion into the room. Where we are now, near the end, I kept my dog and my peace. The neighbor learned the expensive way that rules apply. The little stack of paper in my drawer has as much power as a shout without the headache after. One last part, which I didn't expect, came a season later. A new family moved in 2 doors down with a small terrier who barked like a squeaky shoe. They asked me the kind of questions new pet people ask. Do you have a vet you like? Where's the best place to walk? I gave them the clinic's card. I told them about the chip. I showed them my sleeve of papers the way people show baby pictures. They laughed, but then they made their own. A month after that, there was a lost dog flyer taped by the mailboxes with a photo of a terrier who looked very much like the squeaky shoe. The flyer said, "Reward." I did what everyone does. I kept my eyes open. I called the number when I thought I saw him. It wasn't their terrier, but it made me grateful all over again for a small beep and a printed page and a leash handing back without a scene. There's no hero in this story. There's a man who kept his calm in a hallway and a dog who trusted that the same hands would clip the same leash and go home. If there's a moral, it's boring enough to be useful. Assemble your proof before you need it. Speak softly. Take your dog home. I had the proof ready before the argument. The chip matched, the papers matched, the vet records matched. Opinion lost, records won. Calm carried the day. Buddy is snoring as I say this. He does that little dream bark sometimes where his paws twitch and he chases a memory across a carpet I worried about for nothing. I turn the kettle off before it whistles. If I could hand you one thing through this story, it would be the plastic sleeve. Adoption paper, microchip info, vet record, lease note. Keep the original safe and copies handy. If you ever need to reclaim what is yours, bring those pages and a quiet voice. Doors open. In the end, I emailed myself one final note and printed it for the sleeve, a promise to the future version of me who might forget for a day what he learned. Documents first, then talk. And then I wrote under it in smaller letters that were not for anyone else. The dog always goes home. In case you want the simplest takeaways, here they are, folded naturally into the way I live now. Keep your microchip ID and adoption papers in a safe place, and scan and store copies somewhere you can reach from your phone. Keep your microchip contact info current so a clinic or shelter can reach you fast if the scan pulls up your number. Those are just general information from a guy who had to use them, not advice, and they make ordinary days easier too. Stay safe.